All right, good morning.
Good morning.
I know it's a little quiet, right? The mics are always quiet. Right? Can you hear okay? You guys can hear me? I can't hear me. Okay, well, let's sing. Here we go. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam B'nai Uven, B'nai Yisrael, Oti Leolam, Oti Leolam, B'shamru, B'nai Yisrael, et ha-Shabbat, Lasod et ha-Shabbat, L'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, Asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi Shabbat v'inafash Shabbat v'inafash Shabbat v'inafash v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Sabri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen l'chaim. Was that your own little blessing? And our blessing over Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen, amen. All right. It is nice to be with you this morning. Rabbi Barros is out of town for a wedding, I believe. I was just saying I might be confusing my weekends, but I think that's why he's out of town. So I am always excited to be with you for Torah study. Thank you. Thank you, Bobby. At least Bobby's excited to be with me. So we have a very interesting Torah portion. There's no duds, right? But it's a fascinating one. It is called Acharei Mot, which means after the death. By the way, this is my bat mitzvah Torah portion. I don't remember that. You know how I always get, as a rabbi, people saying, oh, that was my Torah portion. I didn't remember. I had to look it up. But I found it. And then I found when I was cleaning stuff out at my parents' house, I found like the thing to actually prove it. So this was my Torah portion, Acharei Mot, which means, of course, after the death, right? You know, after the death. And we're going to read a little bit how the Torah portion starts. Don't worry, I have it on the handout, right? After the death of Aaron's sons, right? Then the rest of the Torah portion, the part that we would read today, goes on to give us actually the formula for Yom Kippur. Little bizarre, right? So it's called After the Death in Hebrew. And then the English would have better been like Yom Kippur outline or something, right? So what I want to talk about today is this connection. So what do we associate Yom Kippur with? Okay, repentance, making up for our mistakes, all of these things, right? And so we're going to think about how is the formula for Yom Kippur related to the deaths of Nadav and Abihu. by diving into what they did wrong. And if we have time, the formula along the way, the formula for what we do on Yom Kippur. All right, this is the first Yom Kippur. We think about it very differently now, right? With the al-chaitz and those things came from rabbis who came later. This is like when we had the Mishkan with us, when we had the opportunity to offer sacrifices. Okay, so if we want to think about Yom Kippur in our Torah portion, it seems to be a reaction to whatever happened to Nadav and Abihu, whatever it was that they did wrong, right? They did something wrong, so now we're going to get this formula for repentance. So the question then becomes, what did they do wrong? Right? We know that they offered a strange fire, right? But we're going to delve in a little bit into why does God react so strongly to this strange fire? Was it because God didn't ask for it, as seems to be applied? For us as readers, we would be saying, it looks like they were trying to come close to God, trying to do a good thing. Like, why was this a problem? Wasn't it a gift? Is this not an overreaction? Death? Right out of nowhere. They had just gone through this whole ordination process, 7 days of being anointed, offering sacrifices, and boom. And then for us, also as people who pray, right? People who come to Torah study, who show up to synagogue. Thank you for doing that. Like, we want to get close to God. This is kind of scary, right? It's kind of scary to read about two of the people who were able to get closest to God being wiped out. Did you want to? Yes. No, you can. I love being interrupted. Not talked over, but being interrupted.
Oh, okay. No, the question I had was, from what I remember from the story, was it that they didn't treat it with the seriousness that it requires? Maybe that was why they got zapped,
Right, so holy, we tend to, I think, because of the culture that we grow up in, we think of holy as like kind of warm and cuddly, like basking in divine light, right? Holy in Judaism, the word for awe, right? It's awe, right? Where it's like, oh, that's amazing, that's wonderful, that stuff, but also that is terrifying, that is going to kill me, it's scary, right? So holy is supposed to be separate and treated differently, and there is a lot of fear around it. We're going to look into some sections from the Talmud. Y'all know I love Talmud, that talk about the rabbis delving into what they think Nadav and Abihu specifically did wrong. Of course.
So I have an early question on this. I think everybody in here has gone through this. This has been an intriguing parsha always. Is it possible, is there any Talmudic writing from any of the maybe minor rabbis that maybe they didn't do anything wrong? If they, in fact, were trying to get closer and they got zapped, because the biggest hint for me on that is that Aaron was told he wasn't allowed to mourn. He wasn't. So normally we have a whole protocol for mourning and ripped clothing and mirrors and shiva and all that. And here, no, you have to just go on. Is it, we don't know we know there's an afterlife. We don't know what it is. So is it possible that God had a special place next to him for these two sons of Aaron that were lighting a fire trying to get closer to him?
Thank you. Okay, is it possible? All right, is it possible? Yes. Okay, we're gonna go a little out of order. We're gonna go to number 2. All right, will you read number 2 here?
Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before Adonai alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Adonai. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what Adonai meant by saying, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy, and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent.
Okay. So your point is here, right? That they weren't asked. And so they went in, and your point is made here. Okay? So Moses' words to Aaron, this is what God meant by saying, "Through those near to me, I will show myself to be holy." This is interpreted by some major rabbis, not just minor ones. That Moses is saying that God was going to show God's self holy, right, through those near to me. And that Moses thought that meant him, or maybe him and Aaron. But that Nadav and Abihu must have been so holy and so close to God that God took them instead. Now, you guys know I'm a cancer survivor. Yay! Okay. So after I was diagnosed, it was like right around Pesach, the first sermon I gave on the Bima was this one. So you know what I took? I took that maybe Nadav and Abihu weren't screw-ups. And that sometimes just bad things happen to people. And we don't know why. And that's kind of what Moses is saying. Like, they're better than us. They're closer to God. Like, that's a nice thing maybe to hear from your brother when his nephews are taken, when your sons are taken. So there is that. I love to live in a lot of rabbis like to say, no, Rashi is right on this interpretation, and then on this one it's Nachmanides, and on that one it's Ibn Ezra. I am a rabbi who loves to have all of them be correct all at the same time, right? Because I think when bad things are happening to good people, this is what I want to hear. They were good. They were great. I don't get it. God has God's reasons, right? But I also think there's lots of lessons for us to learn from the rabbis who say that they did do something wrong. And we're going to dig into some of the ideas that they give us, okay? Good. Okay, so we're going to dig into some of those ideas. I'm just going to put it out there. There's a bunch of things that they do wrong that we're going to look at today. There's even more in rabbinic text, but I only want to give you so many pages. And I think that they are things, at least for me, that I'm guilty of, but I think there are things that like people in general are guilty of now, and that we can learn a lot of lessons from them. So we are going to jump in and look at some of these, since we did look back, and the point was made, right, that God didn't ask for this sacrifice. They jumped in. It wasn't something that God asked for. So there is something about us inserting ourselves where we're not supposed to be, right? Something about us wanting to do things and be in places where we're not necessarily invited. I don't know about you guys, I feel like that happened to me very recently. Like some people were chatting I'm friendly with, right? So I walk over to them, quiet. Right? Were they talking about me? No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe, right? But they're talking about something that they just is none of my business, right? Right? So sometimes we go to places where we're just not needed or not invited at that moment. Doesn't mean that we are no longer friends, and or in this case, we are no longer priests, right? So let's look a little bit at what happens. So first, in order to understand where they went wrong, let's look at the first step of the Yom Kippur ceremony. So that's actually text number 1. We did 2. Now we're going to do 1. This is going to be fun. Yes.
Adonai spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of Adonai. Adonai said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover."
Okay, so what does this imply they did wrong? They weren't invited. You came to the party, they're party crashers, right? They weren't invited. They weren't allowed to come. So this is maybe our first lesson, right? Here we're getting, throughout the Torah portion, we get hints at what they did wrong. Here, God is telling Moses and Aaron that Aaron can only come, the priest can only come into this holy space at designated times, only when God signifies it through this cloud. I love this magic cloud, right? Only then is Aaron allowed to cross the divider, allowed to come in. So we can infer that Nadav and Abihu's transgression wasn't just bringing strange fire, right? That's mentioned in our previous Torah portion, but rather that they entered the Holy of Holies uninvited to bring it. Gary.
Was this rule known before their death?
So that's a good question. I don't know. I think frequently what we see in the Torah is the people mess up, and then God gives a lot of rules that would have really been helpful to know before the mess up. Right? Golden calf, like this, the Moabite women, right? Like it's a theme. I feel like as parents, like we also learn that way, right? Like, oh, I didn't realize I had to tell you, not to put the fork in the electric outlet. Whatever it is. Also, as bosses, right? We learn these things too. I didn't think I would have to say, like, not to wear your bathing suit to work, but apparently that's like something that has to be said out loud, right? Whatever it is. There are lessons here, right? Seems kind of obvious to us that, like, if this is the holiest space, the Holy of Holies, and we're doing all this anointing and, like, whatever, we just went over, like, these are the ceremonial times when you're going to do these things that maybe you just don't, like, go in and out whenever you feel like it. But, yes, God gives the rule after. All right, so here,
Rabbi, didn't God designate who or what tribe was able to come into the Holy of Holies? Wasn't it just the priests?
yeah,
So was his sons, were they amongst the people who, even if invited, were permitted into the Holy of Holies?
So they were. So you're right. In Leviticus, we're going to see shortly, right, that there's, like, amongst the priests, there's the Gershonites and the Merarites and the, like, whatever, all of these people that are allowed to touch only these specific items, right? They're allowed to carry things as we move throughout the desert. But this ritual, this anointing thing that happened in Shmini just last week, right? Although we had a holiday, so. But only a few pages ago, as we are reading in the Torah, right, they had just been anointed, that they were going to have this special status, and then they're wiped out. Okay, another.
Just a quick thought. Sometimes when we get so involved in something and we're, got approved and we've been promoted, and we forget about the people around us and what the consequences would be.
So okay, I love this. We're getting a little bit of a swollen head, right? And not thinking about consequences. So that's going to definitely come up very shortly. You think, all right, the Talmud agrees with you. All right. So I want to just point out that here we get a lesson I know that I struggle a lot with, which is boundaries. Sometimes I ask questions that maybe cross people's boundaries, but I also am bad at setting boundaries. Okay? So you guys are just here. You guys can all be my psychologists. No, but here we get God is setting boundaries, right? I have my boundaries. They violated my boundaries by coming into this holy place. They feel like because now they have this new position, they can come whenever they want. But just because they are special to me, are holy to me, can come the closest to me, doesn't mean that they get to do that whenever they feel like it. Lots of things we can apply to this. No?
As a father, I would be horrified at all what you're saying. And a couple of years ago, a bunch of years ago, there was a story where this little kid in kindergarten was a little late, and she was running after the bus with her parents, and she broke away with her little lunch bag and whatnot, and came to the rear of the bus. The bus driver didn't see this, backed up, and killed her. Okay, so what would a rabbi say about that? Well, you know, God really had a heart for her, and probably she was going to get a cancer. He didn't want her to suffer, the poor neshama, and so I decided to do it this way beforehand. I mean, it's like they were shocked. They probably made the fire too hot. They probably did something foolish. They didn't exactly follow, and they got burned because it exploded, not realizing that would happen. Accidents happen, and so we look for something to assuage our terrible anguish at losing a child. And to me, that's more what I feel about. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I probably am wrong. But it almost like is they're trying to explain something to get a moral story out of it so people will appreciate God better, yet it doesn't satisfy the surviving parents.
I think this story points out an important aspect of the high temple, the priests. The Jews never had a military class to protect their holy sites. It's not like the Swiss Guard at the Vatican. It's not like the Buddhist monks who learned Kung Fu to protect it. The Jews don't have a military tradition of protecting their holy site. So how can they protect it? They protect it through culture and story. And I think this story of these two who were died because of an improper sacrifice sort of sets a cultural wall around the tabernacle that would suggest you should not go there, that there is a way the Jews protect their holy site.
It definitely does build up like taboo and right, that you're not allowed to just use this as a regular space.
Yeah, well, in response to what Ian just said, you notice that Aaron's immediate reaction was silence. He could not process what had happened, so he was not ready to hear any explanation.
Right, and I agree with what you're saying, Ian. I mean, I even think like the question of maybe they didn't do anything wrong, and the thing that Moses does say makes it seem as though Moses doesn't think they did anything wrong. When you experience loss, people don't know what to say. And sometimes you say things and it's so comforting. I remember like a few weeks ago, Rabbi Barris was sharing this story from the Bima of like a rabbi who paid a shiva call to somebody whose son had died, and how the dad found such comfort in what the rabbi had said, right? But if somebody else would have said those exact same words to another father, he probably would have kicked him out of the house, right? Like what sits well with us, what comforts us, and what doesn't is so dependent on who we are, I think, and what we need to hear at that moment. And I don't think there's ever any justification for a death. I do think that this is, because it's Torah, our job is to pull out how many lessons can we learn from it. And I think more than anything, the silence, that's what we bring when we go to a Shiva. You know, the story he shared, it comforted this man, so clearly it was the right thing to say, but Shiva etiquette is that you don't say anything and you let the mourner lead the conversation, right? If the mourner is telling jokes and sharing memories, then that's what you do, right? And if the mourner is silent, you just sit by them. You don't say anything. You know, so you do let them set the tone. So I agree with you, Ian, at that. And I think the whole book of Job is that, right? You have Job, all these horrible things happening, including the loss of his children, his wife, right? And all of his friends coming up and offering words. And all of the words are demonstrations of what not to do. But I do think that we can learn from the lesson, and that there is something here in terms of how do we treat holy spaces, and like how do we respect boundaries? How do we respect boundaries that are set for us? And then also, like, how do we model that? You know, I thought at first when you said as a parent that you were going to say something about that parents shouldn't have boundaries, right? But we've seen, right, like that parents who don't have boundaries with their children, like that doesn't turn out so well, right? Yeah, you want to go?
And when you do transcend boundaries, this is a lesson from God, what can happen. And Korach got the same fire from God, you know, that not Abihu got for transcending boundary that he should have not breached in challenging Moses.
I just have a little bit of a problem looking at the second portion here. It almost sounds like Moses is saying to Aaron, see, I told you so, which is a very unpleasant message. And I think it can be read that way. This is what Adonai meant by saying, those, you know, through those near to me, I show myself holy. And it was like, you had this lesson before, you missed it. I just think that this could
So
be read that way.
it's interesting. I mean, that's the beauty of Torah, is that like we all get to read it and all of our readings are valid. I see it more as like the Rabbi Akiva moment. You know, like when Rabbi Akiva is being burned on a stick, right? On a stake by the Romans, and is saying like, all my life I've been wondering about these words of the Shema, the V'ahavta part of the Shema. Like, how can you love God with all your, right, with all of your strength, right? Like, what does that even mean? And he's like, now I'm living it, right? So again, right, like we don't want to have to get martyred. Sorry, yes, we don't want to get martyred in order to fulfill this mitzvah, right? But to find meaning in suffering is something that we do want to do.
I'm not used to public speaking like this. I'm kind of horrified at this passage, and I keep on applying it to what's going on today in the Mideast, because from a feminist point of view, this whole thing is like a patriarchy where we're supposed to acquiesce to God. We don't understand God's reasoning. We're just supposed to go along with it. And when my daughter Rachel went to the Hebrew Academy in Miami Beach, she was taught that 6 million Jews must have sinned because God always has a reason behind what he does. So to me, this is sort of the same reasoning why I don't question it. Be fearful of God, be awed of God, but God sometimes does things beyond our understanding. And sometimes I think, especially the Orthodox, maybe people ruling Israel right now have the same sort of belief. Don't question it. Sometimes death serves a greater purpose that you don't understand. And we should think about this greater mindset on whether the writers of the Torah were being moral.
Yeah. So good. Okay, so can I respond? Yeah. All right. Again, I think sometimes like the way that people try to make a meaning is horrific. I agree with you. What I would point out as a difference here is that we're in the world of the Torah, and the Torah is telling us that God took them. Right? The Torah didn't say they added too much. Like we don't, this is the only facts we're dealing with are because we don't know anything besides what the Torah says. So that it's God who took them and not other people. Maimonides says that the reason that bad things happen to us is because we live in the world and because we have free will. Okay, right? Like, oh, and because we're humans in bodies, okay? So what does that mean? It means that I have free will, right? So if I want to hit you, I can hit you. I might lose my job, right? But like, we can hurt each other and we can do terrible things to each other, and God can't intervene, because if God intervened all the times, we wouldn't be people, we would be robots, right? We would be puppets. So the Holocaust is not a result of God doing this for some purpose. It's a result of us having free will and the world allowing this to happen. And what is happening now, the world is allowing to happen, right? So how are we going to use what tools we have? How are we going to speak up? I also have a whole nother thing about how I think God is a feminist, but the Torah was written by men. And you get like little peaks of God being like, you guys, throughout the Torah. But that is another story. I think, the other aspect, right, is like the free will so we can hurt each other. And then the other is that we have bodies, right? So we're going to go out into nature and it's going to be raining, right? And we're going to get wet. Unless we take an umbrella, right? We're going to go, we're going to get older. Our bodies are going to decay. We're susceptible to cancers and things like that. It's what it just means to be alive. Everything that is alive has the potential to die, right? And so but that gives our lives meaning, right? That's the whole there's a lot of anti-Semitic history with the story of vampires, but one of the things that I do appreciate about a lot of stories around vampires is how meaningless life becomes when you're gonna live forever, right? Having this, I don't know how long I'm going to live, like allows me to try and actually live life, right? How many of us have had that happen? Like somebody we love dies and then we book that vacation that we weren't going to book, right? Or say I love you to people. Yeah.
This reminds me of a rabbi who spoke here at Beth Am, thanks to our past president, Bill Silver, Rabbi Harold Kushner. And he spoke about his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And essentially what we're doing, we can't control the circumstances, but we can learn from them, and we can take comfort in that. And that's when the prohibitions, if you think about it, come after the fact. So, maybe, we weren't taught, but then we know how to go forward.
Beautiful. All right. Okay, so this is just one lesson. Oh, but now Bill wants to talk, so. We're going to move on to other lessons. Here we go.
Well, some people confuse Rabbi Kushner's book and think it's why bad things happen to good people. It really is when bad things happen to good people. So we don't have to place blame. We don't have to look for the reasons. What we have to do is decide how we are going to react to bad things, because bad things do happen. And what we do about it is not blame placing, but action and making the world or our own world a better place.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to now look at, again, a simple boundary violation or offering a strange fire or doing a one-off mess up. This still seems like an extreme reaction, correct? So the rabbis also feel that way. So they fill in some gaps in only the way that midrashic rabbis can, where they look at like the few words we hear them speak, right, and expand it into these amazing, meaning kind of shocking and interesting stories. Okay, so we are going to look at Midrash Vayikra Rabbah to Shemot 24, 9 through 11. And I didn't put it on here, so we're going to need to read Shemot 24, 9 through 11. I'll read it to you after our first text here, or after text 3 and 4. All right, so will you read text 3?
Rabbi Levi said, "They were arrogant. Many women were sitting unmarried, waiting for them. What would they say? Our father's brother is king. Our mother's brother is a prince. Our father is the high priest, and we are the 2 deputy priests. What woman is worthy of us?" Rabbi Menachama said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Nechama, "Fire devoured his young men, and his virgins had no wedding celebration," in Psalms. Why did fire devour his young men? Because his virgins had no wedding celebration.
Woo! Okay, so here we're getting a line from Psalms, right? Rereading of Psalms, this beautiful passage from Psalms, right? Fire devoured his young men, and his virgins had no wedding celebration, as a cause and effect. Okay, so what is one of the things, and I would love to put this up on dating websites, right, for all of these guys who just want to hook up and never settle down. No, just kidding. It's like, I know that my boys are going to grow up thinking like that no one deserves them too because of how I talk to them. All right, that we get this passage here that like no woman is worthy of them, right? My dad's the high priest. My uncle is literally Moses, right? Right? My aunt is a priestess. Her husband is a prince. I mean, who's going to fit this pedigree? Right? And in the meantime, here are these women who are waiting for them. Right? So then we have to ask a question about, what does that mean that these women were waiting for them? And why? I love when I like don't include all of the text that I want to go over. Needless to say, these 2 are the most eligible bachelors, highly sought after, Aaron's 2 oldest sons, right? But they are so obsessed with themselves. They think they are so wonderful, right? That no woman is deserving of them. And so when we read the text, there's kind of 2 ways to understand this, right? One is just that there are bachelors and there are women who are being like saved for them because they're from the best of families or whatever. Another is kind of, that maybe they have been intimate with some women, and these women are thinking they're going to be married to these guys, and they're not doing it. And so they are kind of like agunot. They're these chained women who are not allowed to marry anybody else, right? And they're waiting. Now think about the priest, the high priest. You guys remember you read this section of the Talmud. I'm going to pick on you. Do you remember who priests are allowed to marry? No? Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't have picked on you. That wasn't fair. All right. Priests are only allowed to marry, guess what? Virgins. They're only allowed to marry virgins. well, the high priests. The high priests are only allowed to marry virgins. Okay, so this is a problem, right? These women are like rotting away, waiting for these guys to settle down. And so we have this question of, there's a word that's also used. I didn't include it here, but the Hebrew word that talks about them is shachatzim, which is like it. So it's that they were acting arrogantly, but it can also mean that they were acting in an obscene way. Right? So that's where we get this kind of double reading of the text. So it's like either they're having these women wait rotting because they have to marry virgins only from certain families, and they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting, or they weren't content to just like inappropriately satisfy themselves spiritually, right, by crossing this boundary that like God has, but they were also inappropriately satisfying themselves physically. They were either legally or socially bound to Nadav and Abihu, who maybe promised them that they would be their wives, but it's not happening. Okay. So, yes, we're going to go back here, and then we're going to look at even more terrible things from this section of Talmud.
Thank you. I don't know if this is just a translation, but I also understood that they did something wrong, because here it says his virgins. It doesn't say the. So it's as if they belong to them, or as if they were virgins with them and they are no longer. Because it says his. And I'm like, why is that some sort of a possessive term there? I don't know, it's just the translation or if it means something.
No, it's perfect. These women, right, so they belong in some way to them, right? And yet they're not marrying. In rabbinical school, one of my rabbi friends had been with a guy for 10 years. 10 years. Yeah, eventually she broke up with him, right? I mean, it's like there comes a point, right? All right, so this is text number 1. I put them in this order because this is the order that they appear in the Midrash. So now let's look at text number 4. This is a continuation of the same section of Midrash.
Moreover, from this, to Moses he said, ascend to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu. Exodus 24:1. This teaches that Moses and Aaron were walking ahead, Nadav and Abihu were walking behind them, and all of Israel behind them. They were saying, when will these two old men die, and we will assert authority over the public? Rabbi Yudan said in the name of Rabbi Ahivu, they said to one another with their mouths. Rabbi Pinchas said, they contemplated it in their hearts. Rabbi Berachia said, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, do not glory in tomorrow, Proverbs 27:1. Many young donkeys have died, and their hides have been spread over their mothers.
Boom. Okay. All right. So here we have, they're quoting, right? To Moses, God said, ascend to the Lord, you, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu. We're going to look at this text again. I'm going to read it to you because I forgot to include it. If you have a Torah in front of you, you can look at Exodus 24. This is Exodus 24, verse 1. And they're saying, they're all walking together, going up towards God. We're going to look a little bit further in this. I'm going to read 9 to 11 to you. But it's saying, they're noticing the order, right? That it's Moses and Aaron who are listed first. So the rabbis are imagining, well, that means that Moses and Aaron are walking. And who comes after them? Nadav and Abihu. Right? So what happens when you're like walking with somebody, right? When you're on a hike and the two of you are next to each other and the people, right? You start talking. And what are you going to talk about? Well, these guys who are standing right in front of us, right? These guys who are walking in front of us, and what are they saying? When are they going to die? so we can take over, right? It's like these old men and their old ways, right? All right.
So, midrash, things that rabbis are saying later, not in the Torah, right? So this is worse than prior bad acts that can be brought up at trial because, so they're attributing these bad thoughts to kids who have died for doing something that they didn't know was wrong. I mean, the whole thing is like adding layer and layer. Is there an editing process on what midrash is allowed to be preserved and what is not? Because I don't buy this.
Okay, there was a lot of editing to the midrashim. All right, so the beauty of midrash is this, though, the art of this, right? They got this from just the order in which they were listed in the sentence. And so what are they doing? They're trying to picture the scene. And what would the scene look like? And what do I know that happens, right? To plant a seed. It's playwriting, right? So according to us as Reformed Jews, right? Not according to some of our Orthodox brothers and sisters, okay? To them, this was oral Torah spoken at Mount Sinai, right? You can only imagine Moses writing this down before the ordination ceremony and or receiving it and then telling Aaron, who tells his sons. It doesn't, but that is why we are Reformed Jews and not Orthodox Jews. But they carry it as holy. We also think it's holy, right? But holy in that it is the record of our people, these educated rabbis who knew every word of everything that had come out, right? All of the words of the Torah and the prophets and the writings, and immerse themselves in this world telling each other stories. Not holy as if given from Mount Sinai.
You know, after hearing this paragraph 4 and thinking about the whole thing, it seems to me that these two guys were punished for arrogance. And apparently there's just no excuse for it. The young men think that they are better than all the women. They think that they are better than the old men who are preceding them. And I think there's a lesson here about arrogance. And one of the things that we like best about Moses is that he is not arrogant at all.
Right, like the juxtaposition of them next to Moses, right? The humblest of all of my servants, right? And we do get from the text that they went and offered this sacrifice without being asked, without being invited, right? Which paints a little bit of a picture that the rabbis feed off of. Why weren't they married? Why didn't they have kids, right? They were full of themselves. Nobody's good enough for them, right? Why are they going and offering this sacrifice without even, not only God giving it the okay, but Aaron or Moses? Because they thought they were better than them, right? They were ready. They weren't waiting for their turn. They were taking their turn, right? Did you want to, Joe?
But I just want to add something very quickly. You know, sometimes it's not so mystical. This is human nature. In my work, in working with very large law firms, you know, most of the conversations around the shareholders that are older and they need to push them out and put the new ones in, you know, get the newer breed, you know, the younger guys involved and younger women. And, you know, it doesn't have to be so, you know, mysterious.
Beautiful.
I've worn both sets of clothing, Bobby.
Okay, so we have here yet another lesson, right? That they seem to have this arrogance and sense of entitlement. They can't wrap their minds around the fact that there might be things that they shouldn't know, that's not appropriate for them, that they have to wait their turn, all of these things. So that's another lesson for us to gain from this, right? Okay, so now I want to read from you, and I apologize. I printed everything before I realized I didn't give you the text from Shemot, but again. So Shemot 24, I'm just going to read verses 9 through 11. All right, Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel ascended. Okay, remember they were walking before? Now they're ascending. They're going up, okay? Again, the same order. Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and then the 70 elders. They saw the God of Israel, and beneath his feet, God's feet, was something made like a sapphire brick, as blue as the sky itself. But God did not send forth God's hand to the dignitaries of the children of Israel. They gazed at God, and they ate, and they drank. So this is in Shemot. This is in Exodus 24, 9 through 11. This in and of itself is a very strange section of Torah. This sounds like something from the prophets, right? You don't get a lot of scenes, people eating and drinking and looking at God, okay? This is weird. All right, so the Midrash continues to talk about this, okay? They see, and it's going to talk about sending forth. What does it mean when God sends forth God's hand? Like, what does that mean? Okay. Oh, Ed knows. Okay, and some sort of exercise of power. Right. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's read the Midrash. This is, again, still continuing from Vayikra Rabbah, but section 5. Thank you.
Moreover, from this against the noble of the children of Israel, he did not extend his hand. Exodus 24:11. Rabbi Phineas said, or Pinchas said, from here it may be derived that they were deserving of the hand being extended, as Rabbi Hoshea said, did cakes go up with them to Sinai? That it states they beheld God and ate and drank. Rather, it teaches that they feasted their eyes on the divine presence. They beheld God, like a person who looks at another while eating and drinking. Rabbi Yochanan said, actual nourishment, just as it says, life is in the light of the king's countenance. Rabbi Tanuma said, it teaches that they exposed their heads, acted with arrogance, and feasted their eyes on the divine presence.
Okay. So here, what are they doing? They're pulling apart, like, what does this even mean? Right? What does it mean that God didn't send forth God's hand to the dignitaries of Israel and they gazed at God and they ate and drank? What does that mean? Are they actually eating food? I love that, right? I mean, you could just see him being so sarcastic in the Beit Midrash, right? So they sent up cakes, right? They brought a picnic to Mount Sinai. Like, are you kidding me? No, it means they feasted their eyes. They were looking at, and then they're like, no, it's like when you're eating and watching someone. Okay. No, I'm not thinking of a romantic dinner, right? But can you imagine like staring at someone and eating? There's something, I don't know, lascivious, like something off. Yeah, thank you. Somebody said it, disgusting, right? There's something gross in terms of like eating and staring, especially because what do we know about looking at God? It's like we're not supposed to do that, right? Remember when Moses is crying, please, God, I'm doing all of these things, right? Like, let me see your face. And God says, no one can see my face and live, right? But here, I'm going to wedge you. I'm going to wedge you behind this speaker, right? And then I'll walk past and you can see my back, right? That's as good as it gets. That's the closest, right? Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. What happens? He's glowing so much, he has to wear a veil from then on, right? So this idea that they're just sitting and watching and eating and drinking is off-putting. right? So we get, again, what does this mean? Right? So Rabbi Yochanan says, they're being nourished by being in the presence of God. Beautiful. Beautiful. But then, of course, we can't stop there because we need a rabbi who's going to insult them, right? Rabbi Tanchuma says, no, it means they exposed their heads, they were looking at God, and they were eating. This is so disrespectful and inappropriate. This is not how you would approach a human ruler, let alone the King of Kings, right? So here we get more of that lesson of entitlement, and being inappropriate, and satisfying themselves in ways that are not, I don't know, acceptable. There are words. Okay. So here we have three ideas in one little midrashic passage that they thought they were too good for anybody to marry, right? That they didn't have humility in front of God, right? And that they weren't willing to wait their turn and were trying to usurp their dad and uncle instead of really being part of this team, this amazing team. And so, right, so you just mentioned the donkeys. So let's go back to like that comment really quick. So the last, in verse 4, whatever I labeled as 4, it says, many young donkeys have died and their hides have been spread over their mothers. So I think it's like a saddle kind of a thing, right? Like you kill the younger donkey, you use its skin as a saddle or a protection for like whatever baskets of items you're putting on the donkey, right? So it is, first of all, insulting, right? Still insulting to call someone an ass, right? Started here, guys. Okay, so there's that, and it's like as if God is responding to these guys who won't wait their terms, who are so eager for their dad and their uncle to die so that they can take their throne, to say like, parents outlive their children all the time. That's the metaphor. Is it horrific? Yes. But again, like we're in the world of the rabbis who are interested in being clever and interested in deriving lessons and not so much interested in being compassionate to people who have passed away thousands of years ago. Okay? Like their goals are usually to just really do clever wordplay, okay?
I think this teaches us a couple things. In Torah, it pulls out people that are not saints, but people that are prophets who are human beings. And in that case, as human beings, I think one of the lessons is that it's important to observe and be religious, but when you become zealot, you forget about everybody else around you, and all you focus on is being a zealot, and that just ruins the whole feeling of being a Jewish and religious.
Okay, awesome. I think that lesson is very much like echoed in Pinchas, right? That Pinchas is this religious zealot who does something that is not asked for by God, but he does manage to quell and reverse the decree that God had against the Jewish people through his actions. But what does he get afterward? He gets the blessing of peace, right? His reward is a boundary, right? So he's an example of somebody who crosses the boundary, who manages to make it, to still be alive at least.
I'm not trying to justify their death, but I think that what is happening here is that they were supposed to be the leaders after them. They were supposed to be the spiritual leaders. They were going to be also the connection between the people and God. People that were doing the golden calf a few, in history, that they were very easily diverted because they still did not have that attachment to that one God. And these people are the leaders, but they are almost thinking that they are God. They are not really subservient. They are not in awe. And that's what I also read this Sapphire. They just saw something miraculous that God did, and they just passed by it without even noticing that there's this miracle that was placed there, because they just were oblivious. So that's why I think, because I was struggling with such a what appeared to be a disproportionate punishment. There are other circumstances that we've seen before a few weeks ago about the Metzora and other things that were wrong, and that there were other punishments that included rehabilitation. These did not, and that's where I was struggling with that concept of why is this such a punishment that doesn't allow you to rehabilitate. And I think that because they were in a position that they were not any ordinary person. They were they were going to be the leaders in the future. So I don't know.
We've been talking about boundaries and the importance of respecting them, and at the same time, the arrogance that was violated. I guess I'm seeing the ultimate goal of all of this, though, is boundaries within yourself as well for behavior, but as well as in your interactions with others. But the ultimate goal is that all of this serves to undermine the sense of community that has helped us survive the centuries. And if we, in fact, take ourselves as arrogant, in itself, that's somewhat offensive, but the real result is chaos and the dissolution of the community that has helped us to survive. And I think that while boundaries are important, community is equally important, and that's part of the Jewish heritage, really.
I've done a little research in the last 10 minutes. It's only the Kohen Gadol who has to marry a virgin. The other priests can marry divorced and non-virgin women.
No, I corrected myself where I said the priest, and then I said, well, the high priest. Yes.
Mark Twain said, never let the facts interfere with a good story. And so one wonders in the Mishnah and everything what they want and what they want to teach us. And for us, it's confusing because we weren't there and we're not sure.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. All right. So there's something, this is not a me, but I don't remember where I learned it. But I was taught that there's a difference between true with a capital T and true with a lowercase t when it comes to Torah, right? Is it true in that it happened this way? Clearly it can't be. It can't be both that they were innocent and that they were guilty, right? But is it true with a capital T? Meaning that it teaches us something true about our lives? 100%, right? 100%. People die every day who don't deserve it. Every day. It's horrific. Children die for no reason. That is true. And as we all well know, it is also true that our world is full of narcissistic, arrogant people presuming power, doing horrible things, violating boundaries. That is all very true as well, right? So as you said, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I would just say, I like this when I think about Torah. Is it true? They can't both be true. Or maybe they can both be true, right? But the lessons are definitely true in terms of what they can teach us about how to live in the world and what is holy. All right, so, oh my gosh, it's 10:05 already. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to highlight is that there is this sense of entitlement where they think they're a shoo-in, right? They're going to lead. They're going to take over. So in text number 6, I'm sorry, I'm just going to read everything now. This is from the Talmud Bavli in Nedarim, which is vows. It says, why do we not find that Torah scholars produce more Torah scholars from among their children? Okay? It's not just Nadav and Abihu. It's not just Aaron and then Moses, by the way. In Parshat Pinchas, there is this beautiful midrash about how Moses hoped after what Pinchas did that his kids would have a chance at leading after him. Because he saw, and you can see in what he says to God about what Pinchas did, that he's trying to make sure God doesn't choose Pinchas, who also comes from pedigree, right? But what happens more often than not is that Torah scholars don't necessarily descend from Torah scholars. In the Talmud, it's really interesting to see who owns the big houses of learning, right? It comes from sometimes from pedigree, then who's in the house of the exilarch, right, which is the Roman appointed authority. And then it becomes like Joe Schmo Jews, right, like a Rabbi Akiva, right, who's this really poor farmer kind of guy. And then guess what? It's Jews by choice, right? It's awesome to watch this evolution. Okay. So why doesn't it happen? Rabbi Yosef said, so that they will not say the Torah is an inheritance to them, right? So they are not like Nadav and Abihu just saying like, it's my turn, right? I get to go and do it. Rav Sheshet, the son of Rav Edi, says, so they will not act presumptuous toward the community, right? So I don't walk around as a rabbi's kid saying like, give me special status, right? Oh, I'm allowed to be in this room that no one else is allowed to be in because my mom is the rabbi. Yeah, that happened. All right. Same rules apply to everyone. Also, there again, we can think about how that applies to our world today. All right. Mar Zutra says because they arrogate power to themselves over the community. And Rav Ashi says because they call people donkeys, right? These are arrogant people, quoting Talmudic people. And Ravina says because they do not make the blessing over learning Torah. Okay, and this is like where I want to end. They're so used to it. It's in their house. They grow up with it. So what do? They take it for granted. They don't have that boundary of holy space, holy item, holy conversation. They don't have that. Okay? So they don't say the blessing. In the Talmud Bavli in Berachot, which means blessings, it says, our rabbis taught it's forbidden for a person to benefit from the world without making a blessing. And anyone who does so has misappropriated temple property. All right, and then I gave you Psalms and these other things which talk about how, because I want to explain temple property. Usually temple property, right, we talked about how the Merarites and the Gershonites or whatever are the only ones who are allowed to touch these holy items. But guess what? When you read Torah and when you read Psalms, you find out that all of our natural resources belong to God. When we wake up in the morning and we sing Eloheinu Shema, we realize our souls came from God. Every interaction that we have with ourselves and with others and with God's creation, we are using holy things. So if we eat our food without saying a blessing, we are misappropriating the holy. Because guess what? That food doesn't belong to me just because I bought it at the grocery store. Right? It's God's. It is God's. So I wanted to end, this is like faster than I wanted to end, but that we get so many lessons from this Torah portion, right? First of all, to not think that we are so special, that we are entitled. The importance of having boundaries, of knocking before we enter, of being respectful of other people and their boundaries, knowing that our opinions and ideas can sometimes be helpful, but they're not always appropriate. And that everything that we've been given in this world, we're not entitled to it. Whether it's our position, our pedigree, whether it's the food on our table, or even the fact that we woke up this morning, we are not entitled to that. It is all a gift. It is all an act of grace from God. And so when we repent on Yom Kippur, when we go through these things, we're reminded not to be arrogant. We are reminded to respect boundaries. We're reminded to have boundaries. But more than anything, we are reminded that life is a blessing. And that's the day where we reenact our death in standing before God in judgment. And so I want to just end by thanking you all for being here and sharing that it is a blessing to get to study with you and learn with you, and that you show up every day to make our community stronger, better, and really just make it even exist. So thank you.
See, it didn't make a difference. None of us didn't have to talk. None of us had to talk.